Looks like we are good.
All right. Oh, we got a fancy new background. Very nice.
Yeah, I was looking for some things to put on. I said, "Oh, this looks good." So I'll play around with a bit more as well.
It's so funny when we first start, I only see the tippy tops of our heads
Really?
on on the page. Yeah, I don't think that's the way it is for everyone else because at some point it switches. But when yep, it just switched. So I don't know. But like at first it's just the very tippy top. I don't know. It's funny. Nobody else knows what I'm talking about, but to me, I'll just sit here and giggle by myself.
I have heard something like that before. So yeah, it's definitely whenever I see the videos, it definitely seems like it works itself out. So that's pretty funny.
Yeah. Hi. It feels like it's been a while. And
Hmm.
then on top of it, I was looking at the summer and I know that you'll be gone. Then the next time we meet, I will have just gotten back from a trip, so I'm sure I will hardly be coherent. But then when I looked at it, then it was like 2 weeks later, you're gone because you
Hmm.
have your fantastic meeting that I wish I was coming to in England, and I feel good because I know you'll represent. Uh, and then, I mean, of course, yourself, but also digital play therapy, right? Because you're going to do a presentation and all the stuff. So I'm excited. Uh, and then I think 2 weeks after that, I might have a conflict. Like the summer looks like it's going to be kind of Swiss cheesy a little bit for us to be able to be here. So I'm happy that we're able to meet today and at least get a few more episodes on our YouTube channel for people to go to and not have too big of a gap in between.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm sure we can play around with the schedule if we need to. Might get a little crazy for people who want to watch it live, but maybe if it's we do back to back weeks or something, and then have a gap or something, we can definitely work that out. So
Yeah, maybe even a different day and
hmm
people can come in and watch it
yeah, absolutely,
asynchronously. I mean, I know you and I both love it when people are live because you can interact with people in the chat and all of that. But
right? Yeah, I love it too. So I'm excited for today, and it's kind of funny. I feel like we're always like somehow our brains are connected, even when we're not like talking to each other. Like for a week until we get ready for our stream. But just funny having a chat with you before and saying, I really think that we need to dive into the concept of trauma and digital play even further, and it's something that I think will be like a long conversation, obviously, because it's a very complex topic. But something that's always been popping up into my head is the narrative, and I read it and see it so much from people who have all different kinds of interactions or experiences with digital, whether it's entertainment or a family member. They don't really do it as much, but this narrative of it's a distraction. It's a way of dissociating and avoiding your problems that I've heard people say. So um, it's just funny
it's
that I
been
mentioned that to you, and you said I was up, super late, not a shocker, writing, not a shocker, on, the different levels of, complex trauma and digital play. And so, what a great, topic for us to start to dive into, because as I said, it's a massively complex thing, but I think super underrated when it comes to the digital space and working with trauma.
yes, absolutely. And yeah, it was very interestingly serendipitous when I was actually going to say it just so that I could explain to you why I was a little tired looking and slow on my uptake today because I didn't sleep enough. Because when I'm writing, it gets a little once I'm in the flow, I just have to keep going. And so
Yeah.
I had to force myself to get off the computer last night at 12:30 because I was like, okay, I have to get up because I have to see clients this morning. I have to do the stream,
Yeah,
and so I still have a little left to finish on the chapter, but it's almost done.
that's good.
And I'm actually in the middle of writing a case example about using Animal Crossing, which I know a lot of people are not playing anymore, but it does have really great possibilities for grieving.
Yeah.
There are a lot of articles. Most of them are from 2020, of course. Again, it's a little dated, but I do think it gives a really great example of how you can incorporate processing into the digital play in a real overt way,
Hmm.
meaning you can set up gravestones, you can set up a place where people can go and grieve and acknowledge and remember and all of those things. I have a friend, and she's your friend too, and she might pop in today and join us spontaneously. Meaning, I really don't know if she's going to or not. I gave her the link, and she's like, "I'll see if I can do it," and so she might all of a sudden show up. But having lost somebody in her life, each year we've actually gone as friends to her island and left flowers at a memorial that she created
Hmm.
for someone she lost. So even though we're not all actively playing Animal Crossing like we were at one point, we are still acknowledging, and it's like our place to go to acknowledge, if that makes sense, just like it you would if you went to a graveyard.
Hmm.
We're all across the country, so we can't all go to the physical place, but we can do this. So um but I as you were talking a couple of minutes ago, and in my tired brain I'm trying to remember exactly what you said, but you were talking about people seeing video games as avoidance and
Hmm.
escapism. And I just find that I have to take a tangent for just a minute, because maybe I know, shocker. um Maybe, Michael, you can help me walk through this, because to me I feel like I'm missing something, particularly for play therapists. Maybe not for people who are not play therapists, but people who are play therapists isn't if we think of traditional tools and ways of using play in a therapeutic way, isn't there so much that we do that is metaphorical and symbolic, and maybe a process of something that is happening that is not overt, it's not
Hmm.
named, it's not, I mean, it can be, but it also could not be. Even the relationship with the therapist over time can be something that allows a person who has not had healthy interactions with particularly an adult. They are learning that that's possible,
Hmm.
but we're not sitting around going, "Oh, well, because you and I have a good relationship, then that means that you now understand that that is possible." Like, we're not overtly stating that necessarily. It might be an appropriate conversation at some point, but for the most part, and especially play therapists talk so much about how the relationship is reparative and therapeutic in and of itself, right? Isn't that like the fundamental basis of
Right.
so many different play therapy foundations? So if we extend that out and we say, okay, so why is that? We can pick apart and we can label and identify all these areas where maybe a healthy relationship could benefit this client. But again, we're not overtly describing all of that. How is that any different than the more subtle processes that are happening in gameplay whether that's a board game or a digital game or even in the dollhouse or like I'm missing something in there. How come in one sense it's acceptable, it's expected, it's therapeutic to have these underlying processes happening that we don't necessarily name and have be overt, but when it's in a digital realm, it has no value and it doesn't exist. Can you help me?
The thing that I can think of is, and it's a great point. I think it's, you know, experience and maybe not fully understanding, the platform, and that's, not a knock on anyone, just because I think a lot of people are probably feeling it now, and I know you and I constantly always look at it. I think every time we meet, it's just technology moves so fast,
Yes.
and sometimes that can be super overwhelming. When you're trying to keep up, and so I think experience is a big thing, or just knowledge, and um, that could be a lot of things. That could be someone not knowing where to start, and I know that you and I talk a lot about, but I'm talking more on like a generic level, like someone that we may not even know. So someone who's just
Right.
getting into the field, or someone who's been into the field for a while and they don't know where to start. um, I think a lot of that is, I think on a basis level, comes down to that, because I'm trying to think back when I was doing my first training and everything. Um, and I think it was when we were doing our first set of training, we were just given, I think they wanted to maybe assess, there was a bunch of us, they wanted to assess our level of, you know, um, puppet play and how playful we are. And I remember, them basically just putting a bunch of puppets, and then I think some of them weren't. We didn't have enough puppets, so they just put some stuffed animals down, and we were told to just role play with one another. And these are people like we just met, and I think a lot of people were maybe like super uncomfortable about that, because it's like, what do you want me to do? Like, you want me to play, let me grab this, teddy bear or this puppet and start interacting with this stranger that I've never met before. Yeah, and but once you, like, fully started to understand the process of it, and you're understanding why it's helpful, all of the foundational, as you always speak, understanding the foundation of what you're doing. Um, I think then it started to click and make sense. So I think it's like that educational experience, knowledgeable piece that comes into play, and then maybe there's just some people are afraid to jump in because some consoles, or however you're interacting with digital, there could be this notion of it being a high expense cost. So I think that it's a big old web, but I think that's ultimately what it comes down to, and that's not related to technology in general, right? I think anything in life where we think that there people are having success, or I think it just, as human beings, when we see something that someone's saying, oh, this is great, like naturally, if we don't connect with it, our brains are looking at that like, wait a minute, and there's a little bit of skepticism, right? And I think that that's one healthy, but I don't think it's healthy to just take the skepticism as fact and never look into it. um, but I think that's more or less what we do as human beings in general. When we don't fully understand something, we immediately go to kind of like this, I'm going to put it over there and stand 10 feet back and have some sort of opinion about it. And whether I do something with it or not, is up to them.
Yes, I agree with all of that. I know we've had conversations about all of that. It feels though like, let's say somebody created this amazing new toy. I don't even know what it would be. If I knew it would be, then I would be creating it and probably be making millions. Whatever it is, right? Some amazing new toy. I mean, I'm even thinking of some Facebook posts where people post a something and a whole bunch of people jump on the post and like, where did you get that? That looks so great.
Yeah.
How would you use that? What is it? What does it do? Oh, yeah. I mean, what's the link? Like, you'll have within a short amount of time, you'll have all this flurry of activity, of interest. and wanting to understand what this thing is. But if it's digital, that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So I agree with you that people don't necessarily, not all, of course, but don't necessarily have a comfort level. And that might be their own personal comfort level. That might be things that they learned from mentors or in their courses. That might be a million things. All the things you listed, all the things we could think of, it's a million things. But I think because it's digital, people are less apt to say, that looks cool, let me figure out what I can do with it. It's more, I'm going to stand back and I'm going to watch, or I'm going to ignore, or I'm going to chastise, or I'm going to whatever, and not figure it out, not be open to figuring it out. And that's, I guess, more what I get confused about, because if it's that it's not overt, there are so many things in play therapy that are not overt,
Yeah.
that are metaphorical and symbolic and all of those things. So it just, I don't know, we're not going to solve it here, and I definitely want to talk about the topic that we're here to talk about, but I I I I don't know if it's that my brain just sees it in a certain way and I'm having trouble understanding it in a different way, or I just haven't found something that seems to really check the boxes. And it's okay. I've always been, let's be fine to agree to disagree. Like, if you, and I've said this on here before a couple of years ago even, that if you have a solid foundation of what it is you're doing and why you're doing it, as long as it's not something that's detrimental.
Yeah.
Like, there have been some things historically in therapeutic practice that have proven to be detrimental. So, I mean, we're not talking
Right.
those kinds of things, but a difference in opinion or approach, I am all for that, as long as it's something that's really thought through and not willy-nilly. So I don't know. I think it's a work in progress for sure for me, of understanding further, because for me so much of it is such a parallel. And as you and I have talked so many times, is saying, and we're going to tattoo on our foreheads, it's just another tool. Um, that there's something in there I'm not quite understanding. So it'll be an ongoing quest to try to
Right.
figure it out.
I think you and I don't want to speak for you, but if I had to guess, I would say so. But I know for myself, and I think you as well, is that whenever we look at something that can be utilized as an intervention or a tool, our brains look at more of like the foundation, as we, were speaking about, or the underneath, like what
Yeah.
is the, the mechanisms, the, the interactions, that are going on with that particular, item, software, application, whatever it is, without looking at, I think, for hypothetically speaking, because I don't know, but I'm just, this is what my brain is going to immediately thinking about it, is people looking at the outside or the top level and then trying to go
Yeah.
to the bottom, like, oh, that looks cool and shiny, like, where do I get it, da, 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 all that stuff, instead of the questions being like, what are the interactions of it, like, what are the good uses out of it, where could I use it, how, what's your experience with it, like. And I think that's where our brain goes to. And then we look at, the other things to make sure it's appropriate,
Right.
cost, appropriateness, things of that nature, alternatives, because there could be something that is amazing, but maybe there's some things that are not appropriate. So, okay, let me try and figure out if there's something else that offers that is more appropriate. I think that's where our brain goes to.
Yeah. Like, even when I introduced a couple years ago exploding kittens into my practice, I heard everybody talking about this game, and I was like, oh, my clients were talking about it. I was like, okay, well, I'm going to check it out. So I ended up purchasing it, and then I was not just looking at, certainly looking at the mechanics and the trying to understand the purpose and whatnot, but looking underneath those pieces to try to figure out what are the actual components here, what does the gameplay feel like? How does it pull for different types of interactions between the client and therapist? Um, what might some of the benefits be of the gameplay? Like, I'm trying to figure out all those things, and that's what I use as criteria of whether or not I'm going to use it in my practice. And that would be for anything. And for
Yeah.
me, that, as you were just saying, is also for the digital. So anyways, we should get to the topic at hand, because people are like, oh, the title said trauma and you're talking about this other thing. And,
Well, I
you
think
know,
it ties in, right? I mean, to really help understand, like, as we are saying, trauma is very complex, and I think people looking at digital platforms as an escape, or avoiding things that are at play. Um, I think it's good to understand the topic that you brought up about it, about understanding why is it that when we see a digital thing, we kind of look to the other side, but we see something else, we may feel more inclined to jump to it. Not all of us, but some of us. So I
right.
think that was a good jump into it. Because it is, I think what you just said right there, looking at the mechanics of it, it's very interesting. I even think back to some of my own, like clinical cases, and thinking about how, if I were to try and explain to someone, who isn't a therapist, the type of game that I'm using with the particular client that I'm using, and of course I didn't, I'm just giving an example. I think people would look at me like, what, why did you ever think about using that? Or, did you think that something else may have happened with it? So it's more or less interesting just to kind of reflect on and think about it, but to also look back at how that person was able to process and work on so many things because of that particular thing that we chose, that they, may not have thought they would have ever used with a client.
Hmm. Absolutely. And when we're transitioning our chat here over fully into like grief, trauma, primary, secondary, things we've witnessed ourselves and experienced, things that have been something we've watched happen or heard that has happened. I do the same thing, and I imagine you do too, is I try to think, okay, so what are the actual components
Mm-hmm.
of those? The experience for the person. So, like for grief, there's the whole like cycle of grief that people can go through,
Right.
the depths of the feelings, the denial, the hopefully the ultimate acceptance, the transition from whatever that loss was to whatever life looks like now. And if we think about those components and we break it down in that way, then we can start to identify what kind of therapeutic interventions
Mm-hmm.
could help in those areas. And that could be alleviating some of those feelings. It could be helping them process and express some of those. It could be some problem solving. It could be, as we talk about in therapy so much, like identifying the helpers.
Mm-hmm.
And identifying the helpers, like to me, that's an umbrella. And underneath, again, breaking things down to components. I guess I just always do that, or as much as I can. But like finding the helpers or identifying the helpers, well, that sounds great, right? It's something that's get thrown around all the time. Identify the helpers, help them identify the helpers, blah blah. And I'm sitting here thinking, okay, there are some people for whom identifying the helpers is not the problem.
Mm-hmm.
The problems for them, difficulties I should say, not problems, is that they don't want to reach out, they don't want to ask, they don't want to admit whatever the things are. For some, it's they are unable to accept the help or assistance.
Right.
So identifying the helpers, there are plenty of people, particularly who have been through some sort of traumatic event, who could point out, could probably even give you a list. Here are all the right answers to that questions, to those questions. I'm so tired, I can't even speak proper English. But I can identify them, but I'm not going near them. And as Fiona just put into the chat, the concept that sometimes the air quote helpers are exactly the ones who ended up hurting the person as well. So someone might say, "Oh, well, can't you talk to your so and so, your mom, your dad, your teacher, your neighbor who's a police officer, whatever it might be." And maybe one of those people are actually the person who is involved with the traumatic experience. So I even when we're talking about identifying the helpers, I think we need to break that down into not just identifiable chunks, but chunks are that cater to and are specific to the client and their needs. And so this is one of the areas where I think video games, digital tools, digital games, video games, um, really has a tremendous amount of power
Hmm.
and importance, because whether you're playing a single player game, like let's say Zelda, and the new Zelda came out, have you played it yet?
No, I have not.
I haven't either. I bought it. It's on my Switch, but I haven't had time. Uh, maybe I'll be able to. I'm headed out on vacation next week, and maybe I'll have some time to do that, because I really do want to check it out. I enjoyed Breath of the Wild very much, so we'll see. But then you can have different levels of seeking, identifying that you even need help, identifying where you might get help, the process of pursuing that help, and then the process of accepting that help. And that could be anywhere from in the game with your NPCs, with the characters who don't actually have a human behind them. It's, part of the game and the interaction. It could be watching a YouTube video. It could be asking your friend or your peer, your sibling, your parent, if they play it, whatever it might be. There's like a cascade of the possibilities of where you might be able to get help, even in a game that's single player. And then when you open up into games that are multiplayer, and we've talked before about games that have teams like World of Warcraft and League of Legends, and you have different roles, and the team really is dependent on each of the people who are in those roles and the importance that they have and bring. In that, there are many, many layers of how you could identify, seek, and accept help along the way of that kind of play in the game and then outside of the game as well. And so if you have a client who has had a history of being taught that seeking help doesn't help, it leaves them feeling rejected, or it leaves them feeling less than, worse in some way, then when they're in the gameplay, you're going to see that they may be the character who's not going to ask for these things or seek out these things or accept these things. In a single player game, if they understand it's a not a human behind that, so those NPCs, they may become more comfortable because there isn't an actual interaction with a human. But if you have them playing something that is multiplayer, and that could be between you and that person, even the process of trusting within the game that this can be safe and that it can actually improve whatever the scenario is, that in and of itself is a huge therapeutic breakthrough. Now, of course, generalizing that outside of the game is then some really big next steps. But as a concept and as a process in the therapy, that piece is huge. And those are the moments where, for me, the arm hair stands up for me in the middle of the interaction. And then you want to go, yes, yes, and you want to jump up and down, but you can't because you don't want to make too big of a deal out of it and have them shrink back into their shell like a turtle. So you have to breathe, keep your own responses in check. I'll speak for myself, keep my own responses in check. But those are the moments that get really exciting for me because I see it happen. I am thinking of a particular client, but it's happened with numerous clients over the years of being in that kind of interaction, seeing that happen where they would not do something and then there was a shift. And then whether that shift was in our relationship or in the time we've spent together, the quality of our interactions, those kinds of things, and then all of a sudden there's a shift, and then you see it, and the fact that it was possible, that it happened, that it was then reinforced in a positive way is phenomenally powerful.
Yeah, it's, I mean, just listening to that, and also looking at, Play Geek in the chat, and what you guys are talking about with, the helpers being the ones to hurt, and there's so many things, popping through my head, as I said, reflecting on, clients that I've worked with, and some of the results. And I think even just a little bit of like, as I mentioned to you before, but, and we've talked about, but my upbringing with certain characteristics or things that I learned through the environment that I was in, and how I was able to have a virtual world environment to be able to work on things to improve, so I guess one more specific example so people understand what I'm saying is, growing up I was always by my parents kind of seen as like, okay, he's smart enough, he could figure it out. So when it came time to like education, there were some things that I couldn't figure out, and so I would be asking for help and things of that nature. And I think generally my parents just probably didn't know. Knowing them, they probably didn't know, and I think for them that was a more hurtful thing. But at the time, I didn't know that. Um, so they, oh, you'll figure it out, you'll figure it out, and then I couldn't figure it out. So then I would not get a good grade on it, and then I would get in trouble. So you can kind of see that after experiences like that, it was more of, now I'm not going to ask for help because it's just a waste of my time. It makes me frustrated. Like
Mm-hmm.
then what happened then is that it then became, okay, if I did it, I'm not even going to try. Like if I don't understand it, I'm not going to try. So you can kind of see how that's just going down. And
Yeah.
I think jumping into digital, MMORPGs, and first starting off and trying to basically do everything myself, like trying to fight a monster, but it's a lot, higher level for me, and it was hard to ask someone, hey, can you help me? It was hard to, because I had so much fear of essentially them telling me no, which would have brought back a lot of those feelings, like figure it out yourself. And through those interactions with those people and having successful interactions, having positive interactions, it actually made the interactions in which people told me no not hurt as much, because I was able to kind of come to the middle to understand that like it's not all good and it's not all bad.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's when I think back to what you guys are saying with some of those interactions, it gives me goosebumps. Just to think about how that has become a huge part of me. Now there are still things, because we're all human, so there are times where I'll go, okay, let me see if I can do this myself first, but then I will feel comfortable at some point to go and ask for help if I can't do it. So it's more of finding that good kind of healthy response to it. But just to think
Mm-hmm.
about how that virtual world, that virtual experience in the MMORPG helped me, and I can't think of what it would be like had I not had that experience around me.
Right. And all the trial and error
Yeah.
and the the way that you can practice something. I mean, we go back to traditional therapies and all the role playing, like when way back when when I was in school, like there was a lot of focus on role playing. You be this character, I'll be that character. You be the mom and I'll be the kid. You be the therapist, I'll be the kid. Whatever whatever the roles might be, but swapping it around, playing it out, trying to think through what would I say, what would I do, how would I want that to be, how would I want it to go, like all the things. And I'm not saying there's not value in that, but I'm also saying that that is something that can happen very naturally, very
Hmm.
organically in a digital world by the very nature that you often are playing a game. Like you just said MMORPG, so massively multiplayer online role playing game.
Hmm.
I just edited a chapter that was on tabletop role playing games. Like
Hmm.
RPGs are all over the place. When you see that, that's role playing game. Like to me, back to the beginning of our conversation, is to me, it's like the two, like role playing and therapy, RPG. Like I don't understand why in some other people's brains those two things don't go together automatically. To me, it's like a magnet going,
Right.
um, because it's all there and
And
it's
it's
all
so much of a enhanced effect with the digital immersive aspect of it.
absolutely in what could be done within it, the ways someone can do everything from creating their avatar to the type of role they might choose to have, to the ways they're going to implement the different skills or whatnot. It depends on the game for sure. Like there are so many layers to it that then can also be changed. Okay, today I'm going to be this role, next time I'm going to be that role. Or I don't want to be this role anymore. I'm going to try out this one, and swapping hats and being able to try to figure out what works for you. I mean, that's part of the whole process of role playing anyway,
Hmm.
at least in a therapeutic sense, is all right, look at it from a different perspective. First, actually, back up, Jessica, figure out what your own perspective is. What how do you see this situation? What do you think? How do you feel about it? What do you wish could happen, want to happen, whatever that might be? Then looking at it from other people's perspectives and what that means, because I was just watching a video actually. It's I can't remember where I saw it, but I did forward it to somebody so I can find it again because the link is in the forward. But basically, it showed three different clips, video clips. So one of them, you see a car coming up and a guy is running down the street. And it looks like, from that perspective, it looks like the guy possibly did something wrong. Like that's the first thing that came to my mind, is that maybe he stole something, he's running away from something, because the car pulls up and it's almost like the car is somehow involved and the person's running away. Then you go to the next angle. It's the same exact scene, but it's from behind the person who's running. And you see the person running and they're running toward another person.
Hmm.
And it looks like they're going to smack right into them and maybe again do something bad. So first we have car pull up, person running away from the car. Then we have a different perspective. And now we see that this person is running towards somebody and it looks like they're going to slam right into them. And the person who's going to be run into is like, ah, then it stops. Then you see a different perspective, which is basically from the angle of the person who's about to be run into. And you see the guy running toward them. Above is something that's falling, like it's New York City or something, and there's some, high up thing that's falling. It's not a piano, but that's what comes to mind. Like, it's something big and bad that's falling. And the person who's running is actually running to push them out of the way so that they don't get hurt.
Hmm.
But in the first two scenes, it looked like something nefarious was going to happen.
Right.
And if we had not seen the other perspectives, that's probably what most people would walk away with, is that that person running was going to be doing something they shouldn't be doing. And so I use that example because I'm trying to highlight the importance of perspective and the importance of being in somebody else's shoes, proverbially. And in video games, it's particularly the ones that have different constellations of essentially a team, or have a number of different characters that then you can try out, then you're able to have different perspectives, which is exactly what we're doing when we're role playing with somebody outside of a video game. So that if you're playing your mother or your father or your teacher or whoever, then you may be able to see it from their perspective in a way that you didn't when you were standing in your own shoes.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I love that you mentioned that because it is true within those games. And I'll even add, a slight um, point to that to make it even better is the idea that if I'm using a game context, if I'm playing a healer as my main role, and then a lot of people always want to play what they call like alternate characters. So like what you're saying, a different
Mhm.
role. They want to be able to like play it, have fun, try something different. But when you're playing let's say a tank role, you're learning so much about what you need from a healer, and you've played the healer role, that naturally when you go back to playing your healer role, you kind of have a little bit of understanding of what the tank is going through. And when we apply that to the real world, real world air quote, sorry, context, it's what you're saying. It's like if you can role play, like your primary role as a child, a father, husband, so many different roles, family roles, and you can role play and understand someone else's role, it helps you so much when you go back to your role. Let's say, you're role playing mom, and like having to role play going and doing work and coming home and doing so much and helping the family, and you could see how that could make you just exhausted, tired, maybe a little bit on edge, maybe not respond the way you want to. Then you can go back to being your main role as a child, and understanding, okay, hey, look, if mom comes home and she's very short, or doesn't respond the way she normally does, maybe it's not so much something I did, but it's because of she's going through a lot right now. So I think just being able to have that, like you said, perspective, the context, is such a huge and great point. I'm glad you brought that up.
It makes me think of, because I do these tangential things and my neural nets are all like coming together. But it makes me think of when I was a server, like a restaurant, like a waitress, a
Hmm.
server. And
Not a digital server. I'm just playing with you.
and I had started out as a dishwasher. And then I moved up to food prep. So like I
Hmm.
was chopping things and putting them in the cabinets and the walk-in fridge and all that stuff. And then I moved up to being a server. And one of the things that the workers, the other people I worked with, would frequently say to me is how much they appreciated certain things about my approach with them.
Hmm.
Because a lot of people, let's say for the dishwasher, a lot of servers look down on the dishwasher and they would just throw stuff at them and
Yeah.
not even say hello. Not it's like that person's less than, because they're doing this super important job in a restaurant.
Right.
And to me, I had done that job. So I would go in. I would, assuming, like it was a person I fit with and stuff. I'm not talking about being insincere, but like I would chat with them. I would go in and I would hand them things or put them in a stacked way that was easy for them, because I knew, like I even just did the motion, like putting the dish. Wow, that's like a muscle memory from almost half a century ago. There we go. But I still can sort silverware in my hands in my sink. You know, teenagers leave piles of that kind of stuff on the bottom. So I can still, it's so weird how much you remember these things. But anyway, it made the work really enjoyable, and for me, and according to a lot of other people, for them too, because I understood the different roles, because I had been there, because I had
Right.
done those roles. And if there was a way for me to make that easier for somebody, then I was going to do that. Or if there is a way that I could understand maybe their reaction or something, like it had perspective on their reactions and the different interactions. So and Fiona Plaguey has put it in there, you know, connection and attunement,
Hmm.
which made all the difference. Um, People would, the people who would bust my tables when I was a server, if they did a good job, I would tip them out more than the percentage that was asked of me, because it was very clear that then what would happen is people would fight to bus for me, because they knew if they did a good job, they would make more money.
Right.
It worked out for everybody. Then my tables were better bust. They were quicker to turn around. I could get more people. You know, like it's a system that works, but it's
Mhm.
all about perspective. And it's all about being in somebody else's shoes and looking at it from their view. And the reason why I bring that up is I realize that's not a digital example, and it's not even a therapeutic example, but it's a life example, and it's a way that these tools and skills and different experiences that we're giving our clients, it's a way that it trickles out into their real life. This is how this stuff gets generalized, is
Yeah.
that then we start to recognize the value in understanding other people's perspectives. And when we do that and we have those experiences and we're able to work through different aspects of that, whether that's because of our own trauma and our experiences and our pain and our things we're carrying, or it's life in general, this impacts other parts of our lives in really big ways. If we start, again, full circle back to the beginning, if we start to break down those components of what it actually is.
Yeah, and I think that's where, you know, the digital aspect of it is extremely helpful too, because it does build so much perspective thinking, um, looking at things in a different light, especially when you think of like narratives and metaphors within, you know, digital games like we're speaking about. And I can think of, you know, clients that have benefited from things like that, to, you know, a very washed down example, you know, of being able to watch someone who's struggling because of someone close to them who had made, you know, a bad decision and it's affecting that person, and being able to play a game and watch how they're going through the story to try and help basically the non-player controlled characters. A part of the story are sisters, and um, one's is considered, I guess, evil. They're twin sisters. One's evil and one's good. Um, and you're helping the good sister to be able to, you know, essentially save the world. And once you get to helping the good sister encounter the evil sister, once the evil sister encounter is defeated from the user and the good sister, there is a dialogue that pops up between the two sisters, and the evil sister essentially saying, you know, I am so sorry, it wasn't something that I, you know, chose to do. It was you know, something that had overtaken me, and was controlling me. And to watch this, you know, client that was in this moment, and to see what they were experiencing, knowing that someone in their life, you know, had made a bad decision, and to be able to understand that, you know, like the parallels like you're talking about and the perspectives, and to see the results that came from that interaction, like carry on to, you know, their that relationship with that person, was so like as I'm talking about it, getting goosebumps and the hair going up, because, you know, it was like the most perfect example, right? And so that opened up a conversation for the two of us to be able to speak about that. And then we were able to constantly come back to that metaphor throughout treatment, even if we weren't playing that game, or even if we weren't playing a game at all. Like, you know, that provided um, that talking point for us to sit there and have conversations about it. And like, as we're talking about, just talk about, being able to work through trauma and have perspectives and create a new narrative, right? As we know that that is one of the biggest things with healing from trauma is being able to, kind of pull it apart, look at it, process it, and store a new narrative or a new meaning to it that has a reparative and healing process to it. Um, and then being aware of it, I think, is also the biggest thing too, because I think that's one of the hardest things that people struggle with when they go through trauma is like this idea that, you're supposed to come out of a traumatic experience and process it and like it'll never affect you again. And it's like, nope, like that's not going to happen. Like we're human beings, it's not like we're a robot and we have a broken part and we repair the broken part and we're good. Like we won't have any more issues with it. It's like, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah. It's like it's like when somebody in a joking and like fun way, you might see a picture and you're like, wow, I can't unsee that.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's a funny thing that you're joking about. If we extend that same concept to things that are based in trauma,
Yeah.
it's the same thing. It's just not fun anymore. It's I can't unsee that. I can't unfeel that. I can't undo that. I can't unexperience that. And so it is, how do we help our clients to work through the different components in a way that allows it to be organic for them. In doing this chapter that I'm writing, I was reading, I go down rabbit holes, and it wasn't even something that I needed to focus on for the chapter I was actually writing, but I was reading all about like critical incident stress debriefing and how that was a way that at one point it was believed would really help people who had been through traumatic experiences, trying to reduce, particularly for veterans and whatnot, but in general, trying to reduce the incidences of PTSD. And so the thought was, well, if they can talk about it and get it out and express it and all these things, then they're going to do so much better instead of carrying it around. And logically, that makes some sense.
Hmm.
But the reality is that it increased their symptoms
Right.
and their flashbacks and the vivid memories that they had and on all of those things. So perhaps for some people, a percentage of people, it was helpful, but for a larger percentage of people, it actually was detrimental. And
Hmm.
so we have to be careful how the process goes
Right.
for people to work through and process trauma, so that we're not adding to it, either re-traumatizing them or adding other elements into it that now are tied to the current and not just the past, because now they've gone through it again in the current. um Earlier you said something, and I think one of the important things that we do in play therapy in general, in therapy in general, in any of the psychological services, is that we're working to provide a space.
Hmm.
And it's not just the space. It's not like, oh, I provided a space, that's all I needed to do, I did my job. There are a lot of different layers to that, and the interactions, the connection, as Play Geek was saying, the attunement, the processing, the all of it. But the space is fundamental. And if you can provide that space for people, the visual in my head is like a piece of clay or something that's really stiff and not moving or anything. When the space is now safe and open and available and known, then it becomes more like slime, where it can like ooze into the space and utilize it. It's a really powerful thing for people, but it doesn't stop there for sure. I know we only have 3 minutes left, and I know that I've talked about this before, but I do want, in this context of this conversation, I do want to point people to the Tetris studies.
Mhm.
First one was done in 2010 by Holmes et al. It's Elizabeth Holmes out of Oxford. And there were two pieces to it. And what they showed was that after having traumatic stimuli presented to them, the first part of the study was immediately they played, I think it was after 10 minutes, but they played 10 minutes of Tetris. And then the second part of the study is that they went away for 4 hours after the stimulus, and then they played Tetris for 10 minutes. They logged for a week the incidences of any sort of what they defined as flashbacks from what they had seen, what they had been shown. And the group that played Tetris, they had a group that played pub quiz, a group that played Tetris, and a group that did nothing, control group. The Tetris group had significantly fewer flashbacks than the other two groups. The pub group actually had more flashbacks than the control group and the Tetris group. And the conclusion is that it's because it was a visuospatial task.
Mhm.
Tetris is. It's a cognitive visuospatial task, whereas the pub quiz is more of a cognitive without the visuospatial. So you're just racking your brain to come up with answers instead of manipulating things, colors and shapes and whatnot, the visual spatial part. They followed that up with another study in 2018. Holmes is still on it. I don't know how to pronounce the person's name. It's like Iluy Ilundi or something. I don't know. But they did it was in 2018, and they followed it up, and they did it with people who were in the ER who had experienced a automobile accident within a 6 hour window, and it was able to retest and repeat the results, which was this visual spatial task had a significant effect. They found a 62% reduction in flashbacks by playing Tetris.
So cool.
Really cool. And they did it out, they tested them after a week, and then they test them after a month. It's really fascinating stuff, and I know I have to stop talking.
No, I'm glad that you brought it up because, as we started off, but it's very complex, no pun intended with complex trauma, but, very complex topic and so many different layers. And, you know, we got into just a small bit of it. We didn't even talk about, obviously resiliency, repetitiveness, like,
Oh,
the
absolutely.
mastery, the self-esteem, the so many
Perhaps
things.
perhaps it should be a to be continued.
Yeah, exactly.
And for anybody who is looking for more information on perspective, I just have to give a little shout out to our friend Dr. Rachel Altvader, who has a book all about perspective that came out a few months ago. So
Awesome.
suggest you check it out. Anyways, we will see everyone in about 2 weeks. And
Yep.
then after that, you and I will put our heads together and figure out any alternate dates for the summer.
Sounds good. Have a good
All right.
one.
Thank you.
Bye.